Behind every great painting, photo, piece of music, or dance is one fundamental skill to master. This is not a technique, it's not talent, it's not a tool you can buy. This is the backbone behind all creative subjects and contributes towards quality work and the connection with your audience. So what is this one skill that you need to master? It's composition, of course. But in order to understand how to use composition, we must first look at what is composition and why is it so important to all these different art forms. Why should we use the rule of thirds? Why should we use the golden spiral? Why should we have leading lines? Why should we be doing all of these things in our photos, our arts? Why is it so important that we include all of this and think about it when we're taking a photo or creating that piece of art? But composition goes beyond all of these different grids and things we can overlay and use as references to guide our image. It also comes down to how you use color and light as well. Understanding what composition is will make you a better photographer, a better artist. Understanding how to apply it, how to see it in the world will save you so much time and help you to take amazing photos or create amazing pieces of art because you understand the fundamentals behind why it is we're doing this in the first place. So if this is a subject that interests you, stick around and let's unravel composition and try and find out why is it so important to our creative work. Through our photos and art, we often focus on a subject and we tend to tell the story or journey of that subject or try to bring up and convey an emotional response so that when the viewer sees this, we get them to feel the way that we felt. But before we take a shot with our cameras, we first see with our eyes. If we simply point and click with our camera, we often fail to capture the emotional thought that we had at the time and sometimes come back to the studio and look at our images and they just don't look quite the same as how we remember them. This is because our eyes respond differently to our cameras. Composition is so important because it helps us to translate that moment that we saw or that feeling that we had into something that's in front of us that we can share with others and they can understand the same emotion that we had at the time or the same thought or journey that we went on. Yes, there is a selfishness to doing photography and art in that we quite often make for ourselves, but if we want other people to view it and enjoy it, we need them to be able to relate and connect with it as well. Using composition, light, color, all of these forms are ways of allowing that connection to happen so that you can bring your viewer on the same journey that you had. So understanding how our eyes work differently to the camera lenses can actually really help you to understand why composition is so important for us to use. If I gave you 1 second to look at this photo, it would be impossible for you to take in every single little bit of detail that you saw here, as our eyes cannot view an entire scene all at once. Instead, our reflexes tend to identify the subject and focus in on that. Take this photo. It is close up and your eyes can focus on the subject, the dog. As I zoom out to include more of the surroundings, your eyes now need to wander to take in all of the detail and you lose focus of that dog when you look elsewhere in the image. If you pull your focus back down into the subject now, even with all of this distraction going on around it, your eyes are now focused on the dog and everything else around has lost detail and contrast. This is due to the light sensitivity cells within our eyes being more concentrated on a central position, meaning that as we look out to the sides, sharpness and contrast are lost in our peripheral vision. You can try this now if you just look directly at the screen and try to focus on things around you. What's in front of you is nice and sharp, but what's to the sides, you can't quite pick out the details. The same thing happens when you're viewing works of art. Because of this nature of how we see things, when we present somebody with a photo, composition helps to drive the eye of the viewer through the image to that subject where you want them to focus on. Every part of an image is important, but often we do focus on the subject, but we don't want to have too many distracting elements around. Instead, we want to use our backgrounds to provide depth, to provide story, to provide a character, to provide something to the image that gives our subject context and again helps to convey the emotion. So every part of our image is important, but some parts may be more important than the others. And this is where composition is coming in to help influence our reflexes within our eyes to look where we need to look. Another example will be if you focus on the subject on the left of this photo, and then I swap it to the second photo where the subject is on the right. Your eyes are actually pre-influenced to focus on the wrong spot in the second photo because of the position of the subject in the first photo. But there's no doubt you probably saw where the subject was now over on the different side because your reflexes allowed you to pick that out and focus in on it. But maybe there's stuff in that picture that helped guide you towards that quicker as well. So what have we established up to this point? We've uncovered that our eyes look differently to how our camera does. When we're taking in a full scene, we look around it. We cannot view the scene as a whole. So the subject becomes important. We know we want to tell a story. We know we want to convey emotional response. We know we want to maybe take people on a journey. Our composition is there to help guide all of that. But it also helps to make the image overall look pleasing to us. And that's where some more of these patterns with the rule of thirds, the golden spirals, all of these different ratios comes into play. So how can we help draw a person's eye through our image then, whilst still making it look pleasing? Generally, our eyes are drawn to an area with high contrast or different colors. For example, a red flower in a sea of green will attract our attention and stand out within the image. Ancient rules and patterns. Humans are great at spotting patterns. They're all around us in nature and architecture. Using forms that are built around ratios pleasing to the eye will immediately help you to tell your story or focus your audience's attention. If you're just starting out, the rule of thirds is the best one to get familiar with. Most of our cameras have the rule of thirds grids over the top. Even our smartphones have the rule of thirds grid over the top. This will help you to line up your subject and horizon lines in these different intersecting points or along the lines of the grid. This will help the key elements of your image fall into these divine proportions that for many, many years have seemed pleasing to the eyes and built upon. Now, there's a point of intertextuality there in that because we have seen this rule of thirds in action for years and years, dating back right the way to old pieces of artwork as well, we're actually a bit conditioned to spot subjects and spot things along these lines as well. So whilst it's built on old mathematical ratios, there's a lot of context in the world using this, so we're quite familiar seeing this already, therefore we find it pleasing. From a musical example, it's the same as the 4-chord song. You've got 4 chords that are used across loads and loads and loads of different hits. When we automatically hear a new song that uses that same chord sequence, it can bring up memories of the old ones. Even if it's subconscious and you don't realize it, there's just something about the song that you like. The same kind of applies here with images. So beyond using some grid lines based on mathematical ancient equations, how else can we influence the composition within our photos? So for this, my friends, there are 6 other principles that you should start to use and experiment with in your photos, your artwork, or whatever it is you're doing. These will just help you to give some more concepts to see when you're out there shooting or you're creating works of art, to go beyond using the different ratios that already help to balance your composition. So what are these 6 principles? Principle number 1 then is figure. And this is a kind of obvious one because we've mentioned we always want a subject, but actually there's a lot of photos that I see, a lot of people take photos or create art where the subject is not clear because there's no figure, there's nothing there within the image to actually focus your eyes on. For example, you might have a lovely landscape shot with a lot going on in there and a lot of leading lines and things like that, but there may be nowhere to focus your eye on as something more relatable. Actually, throwing a person in your landscape shots helps to give the entire image scale. And giving your image scale like that adds another dimension to the viewer. The viewer's now seeing this and understanding the grandness of this landscape because they can relate to that little figure and they know how big that little figure is supposed to be because that little figure is them. Putting that figure in the composition allows you to have scale around it. But how do you make them stand out? Again, you want to come back to your contrast and your colors. If you've got a very green and blue landscape, try throwing in a figure that is wearing something red, a color that is different and going to pop out. So again, your eye of the viewer is drawn to that and they get what you're after quicker than having to work it out. But it doesn't just have to be contrasting colors and things. Our brains are actually really good at picking out figures. Take this example of a cheetah. The cheetah is running here, it's slightly blurred, but it's the same color as the background. Yet our eyes can still pick it out, look at it and instantly go, that's a cheetah. Principle number 2 then is similarity. We also tend to view a group of things with similar characteristics, such as similar shapes, sizes and colors, can help us to quickly identify something in an image without clearly seeing it. So if you take this example of some rabbits here, you can only see the backs of some of them, and if you were more zoomed in, it might take us longer to work out what it is. But because we can clearly see one rabbit among a bunch of loads, our brain automatically fills in the rest and goes, well, that's a load of rabbits. So using similarity in your photos can really help the composition as well. If you're trying to shoot a range of something, make sure one of these things is clearly in shot and that becomes your subject. Everything around that, our brains will help to fill in. Principle number 3 then is proximity. Now this one's kind of similar to similarity, but it's slightly different. Proximity is perceiving objects that are nearby as the same as the others, even if they're not the same. This works well in a lot of architecture, city type photos as well. Take this image of beach huts here. We look at this and we know right the way into the distance they are all beach huts because they're the same size, but they're all different colors. Now, one of these may be a different build along the way, but again, our brain goes, those are all beach huts. And this actually also makes a nice lead-in line coming through the composition as well, bringing all of the beach huts together as one image. So this works quite well with cities. Take libraries as well, for example. You have shelves upon shelves of books. Now you may see books close up, and as you go right the way back into the distance of the photo, we cannot actually pick out what these little squares are. We don't know they're books. We don't know what they are, but because we have the context of the books closer onwards and we can see it's a library going round, we know that every single little square we see is a book. Or is it? This is the proximity principle in use here. Principle number 4 then is closure, and this is a fun one because it's the ability for your brain to fill in the gaps of something that actually doesn't exist. And again, good fun to use in architecture. Take this example where you can see some modern architecture lines and things, but actually the thing that doesn't exist within the image that you can clearly see is a triangle. Now this works really well if you're going to use framing as compositional tool where you have frames around your images. But in this instance here, what we are seeing as a viewer are triangles, but that's the thing that's missing from the image. This is a principle that works really well in graphic design as well, where you might use other shapes to create different shapes that aren't present on the page. Principle number 5 then we have already touched on, which is continuity, otherwise known as the lead-in lines. Now beyond the rule of thirds and focusing on the subject, providing continuity in your image or lead-in lines is the next best thing to start telling a journey, but it's also the next easiest thing to find and spot because we have lead-in lines around us everywhere. It's where an aspect of your image creates a line that pulls you through the photo, hopefully up towards the central focus point of your image, whether that's a subject or something maybe in the background. The lead-in line helps draw us there. But the lead-in line doesn't have to be present all the way through the image, it just has to guide us. Take this landscape photo, for example, here. We have these lead-in lines, or this continuity that passes through the image, but these lines stop. Now it doesn't matter that they stop here because our eye is already on the journey and reflexing up to where we want the viewer to see it. So have a think about next time you're out. Can you see any lines in your frame or shots, and try to guide them, and bonus points if you can guide them through things like your rule of thirds and through those intersecting points on your grids. And finally, principle number 6 is symmetry. This is usually trying to include structured mirrored elements within your photography or your art, again, whatever it is you're doing. Symmetry works in everything, in architecture, in landscapes, it works all over the place. It can create both a positive and a negative experience. If we're creating symmetry within more landscape nature type stuff, it can be used to create an unsettled feeling because it's not something we might always come across. But within architecture and other things, symmetry can work really well. It can also work really well, again, as these like lead-in lines to draw yourself into seeing the subject in the middle of your photo. Certainly harder to find, but definitely worth playing around with. So there you go. That's a brief introduction for you to composition and why personally I think it's the most important skill to master, because you can see amazing things around you, but if you fail to translate that from what your eye sees to what your camera sees, you're not going to be able to bring anyone else along that journey with you. Composition though goes beyond what we've discussed today. And whilst you can study all these principles, look them up in books, watch videos like this, that translation we just mentioned only comes from going out there and taking photographs or picking up the paintbrush. It only comes from practice. The more you go out and do it with this knowledge in your mind, the more you're going to see it come up in your photography, come up in your artwork. And a lot of the time, it's going to become an instinct of you then. It's going to become your reflex to look through your camera lens and see the composition and take the shot and come back to the studio and think, wow, that's exactly what I wanted. That is only going to come from practice. But I hope that's given you a good introduction as to why composition is so important, maybe pique some interest in this area. If you like this, please do comment below any different types of composition you struggle with or you like to use. I'm looking to do some more of these in the future. Otherwise, do all the usual stuff that you know, and I'll see you in the next one.